So in our last video, we learned the basics of form and how to color in a shape to look more three-dimensional. So now we're going to move on to an actual image or picture, and we're going to learn how to shade in that and color it in to make it look more three-dimensional. So if you haven't watched the first video of just shading in a basic shape, make sure you watch that video before moving on to an actual picture. So we're going to go ahead and set our sphere aside. And now we'll learn how to color in the cactus to look more 3D. Before we start shading in and coloring in the cactus, I sketched out my picture in a pencil until it was the way I liked it. So now I'm gonna go over it in black marker. So if you want to follow along with this part, you can, if you want to draw some kind of plant or cactus for your own picture. So I start with the pot first. So for the pot, the first line I draw is a diagonal line for the side of the pot. And then I just draw the bottom, and I draw the bottom line a little bit curved. And then I draw my other diagonal line, which is basically going to mirror the first one that we did. And this line is also going to be a little bit curved. So it should look something like that so far. And then we're going to draw the top section of the pot. So you're basically going to make kind of like an oval shape to show the opening. And then we'll connect it back. And then I'm going to draw one more line going across. Then the last part of the pot we're going to draw is the little tray at the bottom. So that's just going to be a bigger oval going around the pot. And then for the type of cactus I did kind of an oval and then a circle on top of the oval. So we'll draw the oval first. So just two curved lines. And then we'll draw the circle on top of it. And then to make it a little more interesting, I also added a flower blooming on top. So for this part I did a really skinny half circle, like that. And then added the petals coming out of the half circle. Like that. And then this step is important to make your cactus look a little more 3D, and that is adding the curved lines to it. So when you make your curved lines, you want it to be going in the direction of the line closest to it, meaning we're going to start with this line, and the line closest to it is this side of the circle, so that's going this way. So that means this line is also going to go in that same direction to match. And then once you get to the middle lines, they're going to be almost straight, not quite. You can add a little bit of a curve to it, but not much. And then we're going to move on to our next line. So we're going to look at this side, and that's curving that way. So that means this line also needs to curve that way. And already that's going to make your circle start to look a little more round and 3D. So we're going to do the same thing down here. So we'll start on the left side of the oval. So this line is curving that way. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to draw a curved line going that way. And then we're back to our middle, which is going to be almost a straight line. And then looking at this line, we know that this line needs to go in the same direction. So it's going to curve that way. And then since it's a cactus, it needs to have some prickly spikes. So I do that by just kind of making a bunch of like little V shapes going off it. So we're gonna do the ones on the edges first. They don't have to be perfect, it actually looks better if they're not all exactly the same. Then we're gonna move on to the inside spikes. So we're gonna make those come out of the curved lines we just drew. So same thing, kind of do like a little V shape of the spikes coming out. And now we're done outlining our drawing in black. So now we can start to add some of the colors in. So the first thing we'll want to think about is what direction the light is hitting it on. So I'm going to pretend that the sunlight is hitting it in this area and this area. So that means that this part is going to be a little bit darker. This section is going to be a little bit darker since we have the top of the cactus right there casting a little bit of a shadow. And then as we get to like the bottom of the pot, it's going to be a little darker because the sun would be reaching it in that spot. So the brightest areas are going to be the middle right here and the middle right there. So I have some colors picked out to use for my cactus. So I'll want to use some of these lighter colors in the areas where the sunlight's hitting it, and some of these darker colors in the parts with not as much sunlight or shadow. And then these colors down here I'm going to use on the flower in a bit. So I'm going to start with some of these darker colors, so my darker greens. So as I said, since this area and this area is going to be brightest, these are going to be some of our darker spots. So I'm going to start by adding some of my darker color up here. I'm going to move on to kind of a medium green. So I'm going to mix it in the first one I just did, and then I'm going to continue down a little bit. Kind of just a little bit. I'm not touching super hard on the paper with the pencil, I just want those to blend together a little more. Now I'm going to move on with a little bit more of this color. And then we're getting to about the area where it's going to be its lightest, so we're going to try a different green. I don't know if I like this green that much, so I think I'm going to put that one away. I think I'm going to keep using that one and then maybe add some of the yellow and aqua green. So I'm going to have this go down just a little bit further. I'm going to press lighter so it doesn't come out quite as dark. I'm going to add some of the aqua green, some yellow. I actually think we're going to go back and darken that area up like a little bit, so that's obviously darker than some of our other sections. It honestly just takes experimenting and playing around to get it just the way you want it to be. And the bottom is going to be a little bit darker. So I'll go ahead and start that. And we're going to blend those two greens together a little better. And then I want to add a little bit of our aqua green and yellow to this middle area. And then like we did with the optical illusions, you can always go back with the light colored pencil to kind of help blend all those together even more. So now I'm just going to go back and kind of make some final adjustments to that section. So I'm going to go back And then I'm going to start on the oval at the top, where also it's going to be a little darker because this section would be casting a bit of a shadow in that area. So I'm gonna continue on with this darker color. I'm going to start lightening up on my pencil a little bit. Not press so hard on the paper because we want the color to start to get a little bit lighter. And then I'm gonna start adding in my medium green. And I'll have to go over this in the darker green a little bit just so the transition's a little more subtle. So I'm gonna mix that up here a little bit. And then I'm gonna lightly go over it with this dark green that we were just using. Because just like this section, this is gonna be kind of our yellowy green color. We're gonna do the same thing for this oval section of our cactus. Now I'm gonna start adding some of the aqua green. And this is gonna get covered up mostly by the medium green and the yellow in a bit. So I'm just doing this part really lightly. I'm gonna go back over it one more time with this green. And then I'm gonna do the same thing. I'm gonna start with the blue, the aqua green color. I think I want to go about maybe this far down with it. And then once we hit that area, it's gonna start getting dark again. And then this bottom part, it's gonna be more in shadow because we're getting closer to it being inside the pot. So naturally it's gonna be darker in that space. So I'm gonna start again with our darkest green. I'm gonna press pretty hard down in this area because this should be one of the darker values in our picture. Gonna have it curve up a little bit. I'm gonna start to add our medium green. Gonna go over lightly with the darkest green, just over the area where we just added the medium green color. And then I'm gonna go back with the white to help blend all those different colors together, like we did in the top section. I'm gonna go back over this section a little bit too at the top. And that is what the cactus looks like so far. Now I'm gonna go back and start adding my colors to the flower at the top of our cactus. So at the flower, I'm gonna simply start by coloring in the center in orange. And then to make the flower pop a little more and look a little more three-dimensional, I'm gonna start with the outside part of the petals being lighter and then getting darker as we get towards the center. So I have two different pinks to accomplish that. So I have my lightest pink here and then my darker pink that's going to be on the inside of the flower. So I'm gonna start with the lightest pink. Like I said, the outside of the flower we're gonna make lighter. That's what it looks like so far. I'm gonna see what it looks like with the darker color, but I'm not sure how I feel about that pink. Yeah, I might add another pink to this. Because those two pinks don't go together super well. Let's see what other pinks I have. Let's try maybe using that one. Kind of to help blend those a little more together. And lightly going over this area. Okay, I think I like that a bit better. There we go. I'm just gonna do a little close-up of what it looks like so far. For the next part of my drawing, I'm gonna start coloring in the pot, and I'm just gonna color it in like a terracotta pot, which is like the kind of like the orangey colored pots that you see at like a bunch of home stores. I didn't exactly have a terracotta color, so I'm just gonna mix these together. So like I said earlier, we're having the sun, we're gonna pretend the sun's kind of hitting in like the center. So the middle of the pot's gonna be lighter, and then the edges are going to be darker, and then also the inside of the pot would be darker too. So we're going to use the brown and the darker orange on the edges. So I'm going to start with the orange. And then terracottas also have this section of the pot which bumps out a little bit, so then underneath right here would also be a little darker because it would cast a bit of a shadow, so we'll make sure the underneath of there is a little darker than this area too. So yeah, and I'm not going to color super dark because I don't know entirely how all these colors are going to mix together. Okay, so let's see what the brown looks like once it's mixed in there. Okay, that's not too bad. Or if you've ever seen like red clay before, that's about the color of a terracotta pot.
Tell me how closer to you. Tell me how to do it, baby. 'Cause I just wanna make you feel do about you. So just tell me how to do it, baby. I love it when you whisper in my ear. Words only meant for me to hear. Promise that your secret's safe with me. You're the only reason. Yes, you're the only reason. Baby, you're the answer to my prayers. Feeling like the world's in our hands. Now I know that this is meant to be. You're the only reason. Yes, you're the only reason I'm free.
I'm going to do a little recap of how I colored that in. So basically, I mixed this orange, so my darker orange, and my brown together, and I pressed really hard on the edges here, so that would be my darkest area. And then the majority of this section I kept the same colors, so for that color I did these two oranges together, and then I lightly went over it with this just so it all kind of mixed together a little better. And then again I used this, I went over everything in this area to create the shadow from this part of the terracotta part that like bumps out near the top. And then once I was done adding all those colors in, then I went in at the end and smoothed it over with my white colored pencil to help them all blend together. So now I'm gonna color the other parts of the pot. So I'm basically going to do the exact same thing that I did for the biggest section. So I'll go ahead and do that right now. And for the tray, the part that's going to be the darkest is the part that's starting to wrap around behind the pot. So since this part's starting to be behind the pot, it's gonna have a bit more shadow, and then the parts that are in the front, especially right here, are going to be the lightest area. So we'll kind of start with these darker spots. So I'm gonna use my darker orange again, and then add some brown. Same thing on the other side. And then I'm gonna start adding my medium tone. So I'm gonna press more lightly with my darker orange. Go over it with my lighter orange. And blend it in with a little bit of the brown. I'm pressing super lightly on the brown. I don't want too much because I don't want it to look too dark like that. Same thing on this side. Just to quickly recap, for the tray, I used this darker orange and this brown for the part that's kind of wrapping behind the pot. And I used those two colors to make it darkest because those would be kind of in shadow since it's in the back and a bit behind the pot. And then as I got to this front section, I used more of the lighter orange, and then I covered it very lightly with the darker orange and the brown. And then after I was done with that, I went over everything in the white. For the next part, for the inside of the pot, that's gonna be one of the darkest areas. So we're gonna go back to using mostly the brown and the darker orange. And then I may lightly go over with some of the lighter orange, and then in the end, I'll use the white to blend all those colors together. And the reason this is going to be dark again is because it's on the inside of the pot, and the cactus would be casting some shadows on it as well. So we'll make sure that's dark so it looks a bit more realistic.
I'm going out my mind. Give me some directions to get to you. To get to you, ain't gonna waste my time. I know that we got connection. I think about you. You're on my mind, on my mind, on my mind. Yeah, I'm going out of my mind, out of my mind, out of my mind.
And to recap what I did for the inside of the pot, so I ended up only using the darker orange and the brown. So I used a little bit more brown as I was getting more inside the cup. And then after I was done with those two colors, I obviously went over it all in the white. And now I'm just going to go over my black lines one more time since some of those got covered up a bit by the colored pencil. Our finished product should look something like this once you're done shading and going back over your black lines. So the main takeaways that you should think about when drawing something to look more three-dimensional is to kind of pretend that a light is shining on your object. So if you decide, very first step, what direction the light is coming on your image, you'll be able to tell how to color everything else in. So this picture would have looked a lot different, for example, if our pretend sun was shining down in this direction. Then this would have been lighter, and then everything this way would have been darker. But since we pretended that the sun was coming from here, so shining towards the center, that's why, again, we colored everything lighter in the middle sections. And then everything to the sides were a little bit darker. And then things that were casting shadows, like for example, this top section would cast a shadow on that part of the cactus, we colored that darker. And since this part of the cactus was more inside the pot, we colored this part darker. And then the flower would be casting a shadow on the top part of that cactus section. So I think the most important thing when you are drawing a three-dimensional image is to decide where your light is coming from. So I hope that helped you guys. I'm excited to see what all your drawings end up looking like, and have fun creating your three-dimensional drawings.